Hi. I wasn't gonna film this. I thought about not filming it. I had all my notes compiled and I was like, you know what? Never mind. It's 10, 11 o'clock at night. But fuck it. This is one of those videos where I have a lot to say about many things, and those things all have relevancy to each other, I promise. I'm gonna preface this by saying two things. One, everything I'm talking about is within the context of the United States, and two, I'm gonna bring up somebody that I don't want to talk about on Maine anymore. I tried to figure out how to film this, explain this thing without bringing her up, but I didn't feel like I could do that without giving you all the context you need to have. So I'm going to bring her up. Please don't tag her in this. I don't want to talk to her. Like, I'm begging you, please don't bring her into my comment section. She's just annoying. Today we're talking about a book, sort of. And that book is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is an unprecedented and unmatched piece of nonfiction about a woman in a queer relationship with an abusive partner. More on that in a second because that's not the only thing I'm talking about here. I'm also going to talk about critical race theory, and as much as it pains me to say it, in order to give you all the context, I need to bring up our old friend J.M. Buckleberry. J.M. Buckler. Yikes. Let me explain. After finding my video where I reviewed her book and she passive-aggressively left a comment on that, and then bringing her favorite stan into my comment section, she made a 2-hour-long video where she talked about, in part, my review of her book. And this video was called I Won't Be Silenced, which nobody silenced her. She literally didn't have her platform taken away. She could talk all she wants. She still can. I think she still does. And it's fine. Did I watch this 2-hour video? Yes, I did. Me and my friend, we made some popcorn and we had a lot of laughs. It was actually pretty fun for the most part. And despite JM repeatedly lying about me, taking things I sort of said and twisting them, and that's fine. I wasn't mad. I don't care about her trying to make me look like an asshole. That's fine. I don't care what anybody who follows her thinks about me. I'm not gonna file a lawsuit like she would. I wasn't mad until she brought up In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Does that sound petty? Probably. I promise you it's not. Further context, she is part of a county called Leander County, which was recently in the news because parents there decided to be in an uproar over critical race theory, which I almost want to put it in quotes because what they think critical race theory is not what critical race theory actually is. Leander County was going to have 15 books available to high school students, and one of those books was In the Dream House. Another one was Margaret Atwood's graphic novel adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale. Another one was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. And the students could choose those books or they could choose a different book. And parents decided they didn't want those books available for any students, not just their own kids, but any other kids too, deciding what's appropriate for other people's children. Great. So parents were extremely upset about certain books being chosen, including In the Dream House, and one mom showed up at a school board meeting with a strap-on and read excerpts of the book in order to convey her disgust over it, saying that they don't want these books available, calling it grooming, calling it abuse.
For taking my testimony today. If you have children under 18 years of age, you may want them to leave the room. I will be doing a book review from a 12th grade selection for LISD called In the Dream House. If you haven't read the book, it's a very detailed memoir of the author's relationship with a controlling, violent, and same-sex partner. Before I begin, I would like to mention the false dichotomy that seems pervasive. No one is asking to ban books. We are asking for age-appropriate reading material that advances independent thought and critical thinking. This is a chapter. This is from the chapter Dream House's romance novel. A week after you get back from Savannah, you are fucking on your bed, and you come and she says, "I love you." You are both sweaty. The silicone strap-on is still in your body. When dating men, you always loved feeling a cock soften inside you afterwards. Now you pant on her chest and slide off, and it springs back to where it was, slick and erect, but spent just the same. The next is from the chapter Dream House is Erotica. And just because you can buy everything on Amazon, this is what we're asking our children to read. It's a strap-on dildo. She shaves her cunt smooth, and it glows like the inside of a conch shell. She loves wearing a harness. You suck her off that way, and she comes like it's real, bucking and lifting off the mattress. And ultimately, this was over the fact that they did not want critical race theory taught in schools. So JM and other parents in Leander County and across the United States right now, particularly in Republican states, feel that In the Dream House is inappropriate and doesn't know, because they haven't read it,
what value this could possibly have for high school students, what educational purpose this could serve. So JM and the majority of Republicans in the US are very much against these books being available to kids, high school students, younger students, and critical race theory being taught to kids because...
Welcome back. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis blasting critical race theory and banning it from the new statewide civics curriculum. DeSantis echoing former President Trump when making that announcement yesterday.
Our schools are supposed to give people a foundation of knowledge. They're not supposed to be indoctrination centers where you're trying to push specific ideologies. Let me be clear, there's no room in our classrooms for things like critical race theory. Teaching kids to hate their country and to hate each other is not worth 1 red cent of taxpayer money.
You know, Governor DeSantis was exactly right. He was right to call it out. Bravo to him. I hope a number of other governors follow suit. But as he mentioned, it was President Trump that actually led this particular effort when this indoctrination was introduced at the Department of Defense. President Trump at that time said, we're going to have none of it, and the hardworking American taxpayer dollars shouldn't be spent on that. And really, it should be about telling the great story of the founding of this great country. And what did we see Joe Biden do immediately? He ended the 1776 Commission because it dared to talk about the founding of this great country.
And this is just an escalation of something that's been happening in the United States, especially because of something that happened under the presidency of Donald fucking J. Trump. He took issue with something called the 1619 Project, which was a project through the New York Times. They were collecting information and sharing it this was based on the idea that the United States as a country was not really founded in 1776 when the Declaration of Independence from England was signed, but rather in 1619, like when Jamestown was, when we colonized what became called Jamestown. So Donald J. fucking Trump called this disgusting, anti-American propaganda and dangerous, and called it rewriting US history, which is ridiculous. In reality, all it was trying to explore what happens to our understanding of ourselves as US citizens and our country's history and our understanding of our country if we say, well, the United States did not start at 1776 just with signing this paper. There's a whole bunch of history that is the foundation of this country, and that includes slavery. But Donald Trump did not like this. He said it was rewriting history and anti-American, so he formed the 1776 Commission, which ended up being a report done by people who do not have advanced degrees in United States history, and some of it was conspiracy theories about the deep state, and some of it was just copied and pasted from conservative right-wing websites. So great. I'm so glad that my tax dollars went to copy and pasting. So thankfully, as soon as Joe Biden got into office, he nixed this whole thing, which, cool. I wish that he would also nix giving billions in tax money to the state of Israel, but okay. So my understanding of this discussion around critical race theory is that followers of Trump were in agreement with the whole 1776 Commission. And then this whole critical race theory thing has sort of ramped up and escalated since then. And they're afraid of teaching accurate history. They don't see it that way, but that's certainly how it looks to me. They think that America is the greatest country on earth, despite us having the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world and highest incarcerated citizens per capita, but it's fine. Go ahead, believe what you would like. We're also like not first in education. I don't even think we make the top 30. It's fine. Believe what you want. They think that we need to teach kids that America is the greatest country on earth because freedom, even though plenty of other places have freedom, that's fine. Again, believe what nonsense you would like. And they want to teach this very particular version of history that is extremely whitewashed. If you are a proponent of whitewashed history, the kind of history that I guess I learned, especially going to conservative fundamentalist Christian schools, then you're going to be an opponent of critical race theory. So let me, I guess, start out by explaining what critical race theory is versus what it is not. Critical race theory is not this.
What is critical race theory? Is that legitimately believing people are born racist? Yeah, it was funny. I posted a great little site on YouTube, or a little presentation that just shows what critical race theory is. That was ripped because it was a white person talking about it. So it just proved that's what critical race theory is. A little example they gave in the video is if I was a white store owner and a black person and a white person walked into my store, okay? If I help the white person first, I am being racist because I'm saying that black people are secondary to white people. If I help the black person first, what did they say? It could be because, hold on, I don't want to mess it up because it was such a great slide. If I help the black person first, oh, I'm still racist because it's me going, I need to help the black person first, right? Like, it's the most bizarre thing. It's like you're racist regardless. Like, that's, you're racist regardless of what you do. And kind of like my buddy who, if you hold open a door for a woman, you know, you need to let the woman walk in by herself because she's a strong woman and she doesn't need a man to open her door. But if you don't hold open a door for her, you're not showing her respect. Essentially, you have to see color. If you don't see color, you're racist. That's the basis of critical race theory. We're born racist, you have to see color. And that's why I'm getting so much heat, is because I say I don't buy into that. Because I was raised not to see color. So apparently the way I was raised was wrong, and that's because I have white privilege. And that's why I wonder, like, white privilege, they think no white people have faced any struggles in their lives? I like, huh? Like, I've been through some really dark shit in my life. But am I not supposed to acknowledge that? Because I'm white? Because in school, here in Texas, where I'm located, critical race theory has started to filter into the schools. And that's something we have these, like, trigger words that we tell them. If you hear this, and because he's in a public school, you tell us, you let us know. And he came home talking about environmental justice. And I was like, okay. And you can see how it starts to filter in. Anyway, there's been a lot of heat, a lot of news coverage for the district we're in about these two books, Red in the Bone, R-E-D in the Bone, and In the Dream House. These were two books that were put into the school district. And okay, let me give you the rundown. So typically the teachers will get their curriculum for the year and they go through it. Well, the district was like, we're going to do it month to month and you don't need to worry about opening that box. And the teachers were like, that's kind of weird. So of course they open the box and they get these books out. And of course they're written by people of color, which I don't care. There's brilliant books written by people of color. There's brilliant books written by white people, you know, and there's awful books written by both. Anyway, this is for freshmen. They get these books out and they're going through it and it's not appropriate for 14-year-olds by any shape. I mean, talking about gang rape, women with collars around their necks, eating out of dog bowls, In the Dream House is a memoir about an abusive lesbian relationship, and it's incredibly graphic, like graphic sex scenes, all sorts. Anyway, just what is the point of it besides that it's written by a BIPOC author and they're trying to add more diverse books? Well, can we not add diverse books that aren't talking about this to kids? Like, what is the point? This isn't just like, oh, go put it on the shelf. This is like, they need to teach it. So the teachers were pissed, and one ran to the principal and was like, well, I can't even read this out loud. They were supposed to teach this anyway. It got really bad, and teachers were told, if you're not going to teach it, you can go. And it made the news. Anyway, they ended up pulling the books. And my dad was so fired up when I was telling him, he goes, I'm going to send you the books, and I want you to look at them. And I was like, I don't want that shit in my house. But he did, and I looked through them, and I was appalled. Because it's not education. What is that just, you know, I write some very explicit stuff, and my kids aren't for freshmen in high school. Like, what is that doing? You know, if you want to get them diverse books, get them diverse books. The books where they're going to learn something, have a positive message, not just, like, just graphic, explicit content. You know, like, what? And then there was a graphic novel with the most bizarre pictures of a man looks like a gynecologist, the doctor, and the woman, and he's like, eyes up, honey, and it's all illustrated. What? Like, what is happening? Anyway, so Texas is trying to pass that, and you can't teach that shit. She's a racist because she doesn't believe with critical race theory. That's the big one, I think, because I came out and said that I don't. I cannot believe that you're born racist. I don't believe that because I have a child, and I've seen that child interact when he was very, very, very young with people of all different colors. And if he was born racist, he would have not played with them or not spoken to them. My child grew up, anytime we would see a black person, he would run to them and he would want to hang out. And he said, Mom, they look so cool. And he was just obsessed with dark skin. He would run. I would have to go after him and be like, I'm sorry, like, what am I supposed to say? Like, my child loves black people. And we never even called people of color by terms. Never. Because that's how I was raised. You just saw a person for a person. And if people are going to say, that makes me racist, I'm going to say, that's some bullshit right there. I'm not going to buy into that crap. I'm not. Sorry, paused. Don't call. I'm not. They can rip into me all day. I don't believe it. I will not buy into that false narrative. It's not going to do it. So anyway, that's what they're going to keep doing, though. Watch. I really appreciate you calling out critical race theory. Absolutely. I keep telling people to do their research, and they keep saying, like, oh, it's not cultural Marxism. What did someone say yesterday? They're offended by me saying it's cultural Marxism. But that's what it is. That's what I'm saying. So I'm trying to do. You know, I refer to, like, pre-woke times now. The pre-woke times. When so many people would just get along. You know, it's funny. My husband played a trick on me. He sent me a picture. He was dropping our kid off at school. And it was a photo of two girls walking together with an umbrella. And he goes, what do you see? And so I'm looking, and I'm like, I don't know what I see. Like, I don't know. I have no idea. I was like, I don't know. What am I looking at? Because it's just like a sidewalk. And he goes, look, Carter, what do you see? And I'm like, oh, this is like a hidden image. I'm like staring at the girls. I was like, I don't know. And he goes, you're supposed to see two black girls walking together. And I was like, oh, snap. I get it. Like, I saw that picture, and I just saw two middle school girls walking together, talking. But critical race theory wants us to see two black girls walking. And I still don't see that. you know, and that's to me what it's really sad. I get it, you know, I get it when people have had all these conversations with people who just don't agree with anything I'm saying. That's fine. They don't have to. But saying like, you know, you have to see color to acknowledge these, you know, these struggles that people have had in their lives. But that to me, and this is my opinion, you know, to me, that is promoting a victim mentality. Because the 12-year-old girl the little girls who are walking together, you know, they, how do I say this? They're not right now going through the struggles that way before the civil rights, before black people were. They're not. If this was way, you know, pre-civil rights, then yeah, absolutely, because people were going through that. And that was a horrible, horrible thing. Slavery. Horrible, horrible. But, you know, I hear the fact of let's rewrite history and we're going to rewrite it where the U.S. was founded on slavery. I'm like, what about Indigenous people? What about the Native Americans? It sucks. It's very unfortunate. It's spooky to have a young child right now because you know, we're pulling him out of public school, even though Texas is trying to put a ban on critical race theory. Like I said, I already saw it filtering in. So we're not comfortable with keeping him in public schools right now. And no, that's not me sheltering my child. That's me protecting my child from being indoctrinated by bullshit. I don't want my child going to a school where he's just going to be fed a bunch of bullshit all day. Because it's the parent's job to teach your child about religion, about beliefs. It's not the teacher's job. It's not the school's job. It's my job as a parent.
Critical race theory is an academic concept about systemic institutional racism. Critical race theory is not saying that all white people are bad and rich or exempt from experiencing bad things, which seems to be the understanding of the people who are against critical race theory, because they don't understand systemic racism, the systems in place that are racist, and they don't understand how white privilege exempts them from the oppression of these systems. It's really, really simple, but for some reason it's just going over their head. Systemic or institutional racism is a form of racism that is embedded in systems, in organizations, in institutions, such as the law, politics, education, housing, medicine, criminal justice, employment. It exists, systemic racism exists, because when these systems were created in the United States, they were made by people with overt racial bias, and thusly, the racism is written into these institutions. Again, those are things like law and policing and criminal justice, housing, employment, medicine, education. So this term, systemic racism, refers to how the government has discriminated against Black and Indigenous and other people of color through these unjust policies in these systems. For example, look up how policing started in the United States. Look up when men of color and women of color subsequently, not at the same time. Look up when men of color and women of color got the right to vote versus when voting was written into the Constitution. Look up the 3/5 compromise, the effects that had on Black people versus Indigenous people, because the effects were different. Look at redlining. Look at the education system. Look at the history and the origins of the SATs. Even the history and the origins of the NFL. Look at the whitewashing of history. Take a person like Abraham Lincoln, for instance, who is heralded as the person who abolished slavery. Yay! Emancipation Proclamation, right? What a hero! When in reality, he's responsible for the massacre of Native Americans and wanted to send Black people away after the whole Emancipation Proclamation thing because white people were just uncomfortable with them being here. How nice of him. How thoughtful. Or making Christopher Columbus a hero and having a holiday named after him, having monuments erected in his honor, when he's responsible for the enslavement, rape, and mass genocide of Native populations such as the Taino people, or the racism of George Washington, our first US president, who is known for his honesty because yes, he did chop down that cherry tree. He also enslaved people. Okay. The very fact that this country was made possible only by the eradication of Native Americans. Look at what we did to their buffalo and their water sources. Look at the residential schools that we forced their children into and literally indoctrinated them. Look what we did in World War II to the Japanese population of the United States. And look at today. Look at the generational trauma that we have caused. If you look at statistics, you will see that racism persists. Look at Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit persons being abducted and murdered at 4 to 6 times the rate of their white peers. COVID hitting communities of color in higher rates. Look at the systemic racism racism in the medical community. Look at the surveys done by doctors talking about how they think that Black patients' skin is thicker and that they need less pain medication just because they're Black. Look at Black maternal mortality rates and complications from pregnancy, having 4 times the rate of pregnancy complications, including death, than their white peers. And this is even when we take into account socioeconomic status and having health care, among other factors. And the rate of Black and brown civilians being murdered by police. And I know that some of you may quote that thing. I can't stand when people do this. It's so stupid. You'll go onto the FBI.gov and you're like, look how many white people were murdered by police. I'll put it up here. And you're like, yeah, that is more than the Black, but you have to look at it statistically. White people make up 70% of the population. If it were equal, then Black people would have the same number. But Black civilians make up 13% of the population, which means when you break this down per capita, Black civilians are being murdered at 4 times the rate. Let's also talk about the fact that the same fucking states who want to ban critical race theory for being indoctrination and anti-American are the same places that want to ban history books from teaching children that the United States Civil War happened because of slavery. They want to teach them that it happened because of fight over states' rights. That's white supremacy. That's a white supremacist talking point. That is fucking racist. This is all happening because America, the United States, does not want to reckon with its racist past or its racist present. And being called a racist is the worst thing that you can call somebody. Like, that's more hurtful to people than watching other people be repeatedly harmed by systems in place. So critical race theory teaches these facts. And this is not a class. Like, critical race theory is a theory, and there are books that people use in order to teach critical race theory. It's sort of like how feminist theory exists, right? And I could use a certain book, take, I don't know, people like to use Margaret Atwood's A Handmaid's Tale in feminist theory classes. It's not like you go to critical race theory class and get your critical race theory textbooks. You take a civics class and you might pick up a book that teaches the academia of critical race theory. It's simply a study in academia based on the concepts of systemic institutional racism. The same law professor who coined the term intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw, who I've talked on my channel about before, is a founding, pioneering critical race theorist. And she says, and I completely agree, that critical race theory is being misrepresented and used as a political tool. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did. That's exactly what the governor of my state, Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, did recently when he banned critical race theory from being taught in schools. What an asshole. Couldn't ban my tax dollars from going to fucking CPCs that literally spout medical falsehoods to pregnant people, but okay. Critical race theory has become a target of Republican politicians, legislators in several states, I think 6 states across the country. They've introduced bills to place barriers on teaching anything that sounds like critical race theory. They don't want things about race and inequality being taught in schools. And make no mistake, these bans are racism persisting in covert form, because talking about racism does not create a divide. Ignoring racism does. It's very simple. Like, how would talking about racism create division? How? It sort of reminds me of when an abusive family member would like be allowed to get away with shit and your other family members would gaslight you about it. So it's like if you're talking about, oh, well, my uncle is a alcoholic and he drinks and then he verbally abuses everybody. So you bring this up and your cousin is like, why are you being so divisive? And it's like, I'm not. I'm just calling out the problem and saying, let's do something about it so that we can reconcile and do better going forward. And your cousin's like, no, you're just causing problems. Why can't you just be happy? Everything was fine before you brought this up. Nobody was bothered. This was so safe before you brought this up. And you're like, I'm the problem. but he's being abusive. Everybody is not doing well because of the abuse. If we would reckon with that, we could all do better moving forward. No, that doesn't sound good. We'd rather just ignore it. Like, what? So Kimberly Crenshaw says that critical race theory seeks to understand how systems in the US have been shaped by covert and overt racism, such as the laws we have and how those laws have continued to impact people who are not white. Jim Crow South, redlining. Any of this sounding familiar? She says, the law has played a substantially significant role in establishing what race and racism actually are in American society. So she's pointing to the effects that laws have had on Black people specifically. We can never forget that slavery was perfectly legal and constitutionally protected. Law has played a mixed role in our society. It has enslaved us. It has justified disenfranchising us. It has justified segregating us. It has justified marginalizing us, criminalizing us. So parents in Texas, like JM, would argue that talking about race creates a victim complex for non-white people, and I vehemently disagree. My view on it is that it gives everybody, people who are white, people who are not, both the historical perspective and present perspective, which gives the ability to see how discrimination is still present in society today, in systems and institutions and organizations. And I would argue that not teaching kids these things is a violation of their human rights, because proper education is a human right. Avoiding teaching kids things just because it makes you uncomfortable is gross. If you have a child who is white, you will likely feel that teaching them colorblindness is the right thing to do. And this is because you feel like that's teaching people equality, to teach that everybody is equal, right? But systems don't treat people that way. And for white kids, when they come into contact with these institutions and these systems and these organizations, their whiteness will not have an impact on their lives within these systems. That is white privilege. It's so simple. Like, that's the simplest I can make it for you. For those who have kids who are not white, for those of us who have Black and brown children, those kids are not going to have the privilege to have their race not be part of the context in which they make their way through these institutions. They don't have the privilege to be unaffected by racial bias in systems. So you teaching your kids to be colorblind is not teaching them solidarity. You not teaching your kids about how race impacts certain people, it just perpetuates ignorance, and it doesn't give your kids the understanding of how their life won't be affected the same way in these systems as other people's lives will be affected. So you can pretend that you don't see color, you do, but other people are going to experience racism in these institutions nonetheless. Your colorblindness does nothing to help anybody. Nothing. It only perpetuates harm. Okay, so about In the Dream House. It took me a minute to sift through my feelings and figure out why this was bothering me. It made me frustrated because I'm just really tired of white Christians in the South and the United States using kids to virtue signal in an effort to cover up their biases and perpetuate harm onto others.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
This is the exact same excuse that they use to not teach science-based comprehensive sex ed to kids, even though statistics show that when we do give kids these necessary informations and something that will affect their life going forward, it helps. And when we deprive them of it, when we teach them abstinence education instead, it does nothing to lower STD rates, and it raises the teen pregnancy rate. And comprehensive science-based sex ed includes teaching about the LGBTQIA+ community, destigmatizing and helping them learn about sexuality in a way that doesn't exclude them because it's not heteronormative, cis heteronormative. So what does In the Dream House have to offer kids that I feel they are being deprived of? I'm glad you asked. Many teenagers are having relationships in high school. Some are having sexual relationships. 40% of teenagers, I think it's 15 to 18 or maybe it's 14 to 18, report that they're having sexual relationships. But some people are ace, or some people are just not sexually active. They're still having relationships. These are typically their first relationships, so they're still learning, they're navigating, and they're learning what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept, what their boundaries are. So guess who needs to be taught about healthy relationships and what abuse is, what constitutes abuse outside of just physical abuse, the obvious abuse. A quote from Abuse from In the Dream House. Abusers do not need to be, and rarely are, cackling maniacs. They just need to want something and not care how they get it. This book is a teaching tool, and it teaches how abuse is not always physical. How it can be when you're in an abusive relationship. How easy it can be to lose yourself. It can feel impossible to get out, and you can start cutting off your friends because that's what your partner wants you to do. But because you love them and they're not physically abusing you, you think this is normal, this is fine. They're not crossing a line. So parents want to ban this book because it has some sexually graphic content in it, but they don't want to ban books that have actual abuse in them. And honestly, I would list Twilight here. Are we banning 14-year-olds from reading Twilight? Are we doing that on the case of it being promoting abuse? No? Okay, because we're gonna have kids read things and we're going to explain to them, hey, some behavior is not okay. This is in this book and I want you to know that's not okay. We're not gonna teach kids to read with nuance, critique things. Okay, guess we'll just won't talk about the manipulative and abusive behavior patterns of partners in YA books that are widely available to teens. It's fine. So add on top of this, the stigma that already comes with being queer, that still comes with being queer, even in 2021. Already there is so much stigma surrounding being LGBTQIA+. So in some situations, young people are going to fear that they cannot speak out because they are queer and they are in a relationship, because the stigma that exists makes them feel like I cannot speak out for fear of validating homophobic ideas. If I tell somebody I'm being abused, they're gonna say, it's because you're queer. Better not be queer anymore. Being queer is inherently bad. That's why you're being abused. So if you don't know what abuse is, or if you do, but you can't feel free to speak out because homophobia, and you're young and you feel like you're in love, what are you gonna do? These are things addressed in The Dream House. Let me read you an excerpt from literally the first couple of pages. The abused woman has certainly been around as long as human beings have been capable of psychological manipulation and interpersonal violence, but as a generally understood concept, it and she did not exist until about 50 years ago. The conversation about domestic abuse within queer communities is even newer and even more shadowed. As we consider the forms intimate violence takes today, each new concept, the male victim, the female perpetrator, queer abusers, and the queer abused, reveals itself as another ghost that has always been here, haunting the ruler's house. Modern academics, writers, and thinkers have new tools to delve back into the archives in the same way that historians and scholars have made their understanding of contemporary queer sexuality reverberate through the past. Consider, what is the topography of these holes? Where do the lacunae live? How do we write by the wronged people of the past without physical evidence of their suffering? How do we direct our record-keeping toward justice? The memoir is, at its core, an act of resurrection. Memoirists recreate the past, reconstruct dialogue. They summon meaning from events that have long been dormant. They braid the clays of memory and essay and fact and perception together, smash them into a ball, roll them flat. They manipulate time, resuscitate the dead. They put themselves and others into necessary context. I enter into the archive that domestic abuse between partners who share gender identity is both possible and not uncommon, and that it can look something like this. I speak into the silence. I toss the stone of my story into a vast crevice, measure the emptiness by its small sound. Let's be honest, it's just beautiful fucking writing, but also it's talking about the fact that queerness gets erased from history. Another way history is rewritten by the winners, the homophobes who try to eradicate the queer people. By the way, not everywhere in the United States is conversion therapy illegal. Still legal in many places. Thanks, Christians. So in a similar way to how we don't teach unwhitewashed history, that is correct, we don't teach queer history to kids, ever. Like Stonewall, or who's Harvey Milk? Who created the pride flag? Shit, queer people only got the right to marry in like 2008. And trans kids are currently fighting in the United States just for the right to play sports. They're kids. It's not the Olympics. Just let trans kids play soccer with kids who share their gender identity. I just don't what is the problem with trans kids playing sports? What is your problem? I can't stand the United States. And yes, to this Karen, there is a part in the Dream House that talks about a dildo. You know who already knows about dildos, Karen? You're a 14-year-old. You really think 14-year-olds don't know what a dildo is? In the United States, you really think that? Unless you're Amish, you know what a dildo is. You know what a freaking strap-on is. I don't know what to tell you. This is America. If you don't teach your kids about dildos, Karen, the internet will, or their friends will. And what's wrong with dildos? What's wrong with strap-on? What's actually wrong with it? Tell me what's wrong with it. Nothing. Nothing. You are having a problem with sex toys because we're making sex inherently dirty. Sex between consenting adults is fine. Conflating sex toys with dirtiness is no different than you conflating queerness with dirtiness. Sex toys aren't dirty, they're just stigmatized. Kids 14 to 18 are already masturbating, if not having sex. Perpetuating stigma doesn't do any good for your kids. Literally does nothing. You're not saving them. You're leaving them to their own devices. Ooh, yikes. I wish I had picked a different word there. You're leaving them to their own devices to find out what dildos are. It's just perpetuating misinformation and bigotry. That's all it is. And speaking of this, in the Dream House also teaches about perpetuating stigma and covert bias and how that is taught through media. I think a lot about queer villains, the problem with pleasure and audacity of them. I know I should have a very specific political response to them. I know, for example, I should be offended by Disney's lineup of vain effete ne'er-do-wells like Scar and Jafar, sinister drag queens like Ursula and Cruella de Vil, also that lady from The Rescuers, and constipated man-hating power dykes like Lady Tremaine and Maleficent. I should be furious at Downton Abbey's scheming gay butler and girlfriend's controlling lunatic lesbian. I should be indignant about Rebecca and Strangers on a Train and Laura and The Terror and All About Eve and every other classic and contemporary foppish, conniving, sissy, cruel, humorless, depraved, evil, insane homosexual on the large and the small screen. And yet, while I recognize the problem intellectually, the system of coding, the way villainy and queerness became a kind of shorthand for each other, I cannot help but love these fictional queer villains. I love them for all their aesthetic lushness and theatrical glee, their fabulousness, their ruthlessness, their power. They're always by far the most interesting characters on screen. After all, they live in a world that hates them. They've adapted. They've learned to conceal themselves. They've survived. By the way, Carmen did hear about Leander County trying to ban her book. And she did do a response piece from the New York Times called "Banning My Book Won't Protect Your Child," where she explains why it's ridiculous that parents want to ban her book. I'm going to link it below, but here's the parts I want to highlight. I have teamed up with Margaret Atwood, Jodi Picoult, Jacqueline Woodson, and many other authors whose works have been targeted for removal from class reading lists in Leander County. In conjunction with PEN America, a group that promotes free literary expression, we wrote a letter to the school district demanding that our books remain available to students. While our books may contain passages that are potentially uncomfortable, challenging, or even offensive, exposure to our books is vital to expanding minds, affirming experiences, creating appreciation for the arts, and building empathy. In short, respecting the adults that the students in Leander, Texas will soon become. Schools rarely provide education about relationships. Teenagers aren't often taught that extreme jealousy is not romantic, but is a sign of an unhealthy relationship. The sections of my book read aloud by the outraged parent in that meeting are a part of a larger story examining what it means to be so head over heels in love and lust or both that you let someone treat you badly. It was painful and difficult to recount that experience from my book, to lay plain my vulnerabilities and dark moments. But I'm glad I did it. Book bans in America are nothing new. As long as there have been writers, there have been reactionaries at their heels. Today in the United States, books that feature characters who are Black, Latinx, Indigenous, queer, or trans, or are written by authors who identify that way, frequently make up a majority of the American Library Association's annual list of the top 10 books most often censored in libraries and schools. These book bans deprive students of a better understanding of themselves and one another. As a writer, I believe in the power of words to cross boundaries in a time of deep division. Now more than ever, literature matters. Those who seek to ban my book, and others like it, are trying to exploit fear about the realities that books like mine expose, fear about desire and sex and love, and distort it into something ugly in an attempt to wish away queer experiences. They do not try to hide their contempt or their homophobia. They accuse teachers who want to assign my book of grooming students, language that's often used to accuse someone of being a pedophile and a common conservative dog whistle when it comes to queer art. They want to shield their children from anything that suggests a world beyond their narrow perception. The high school seniors affected by this action are on the cusp of adulthood, if not already there. Soon they will go into the world. They will date and fall in love and begin relationships, good and bad. I understand that for a parent, it's almost unthinkable to imagine that your child could experience such trauma, but preventing children from reading my book or any book won't protect them. On the contrary, it may rob them of ways to understand the world they'll encounter, or even the lives they're already living. You can't recognize what you've never been taught to see. You can't put language to something for which you've been given no language. Why do we not see these acts of censorship for what they are? Short-sighted, violent, and unforgivable. I am in full agreement with Carmen, and I think that this is so fucking funny. I think this is so fucking funny. Coming from the same people who bitch and moan about cancel culture. Fucking funny. Oh man, I've been recording for an hour. I'm tired. All right, back to teaching kids about accurate info about history. A quote from In the Dream House. It's not radical to point out that people on the fridge have to be better. Did I just say fridge? Oh God, I'm tired. It's not being radical to point out that people on the fringe have to be better than people in the mainstream, that they have twice as much to prove. In trying to get people to see your humanity, you reveal just that, your humanity, your fundamentally problematic nature, all the unique and terrible ways in which people can and do fail. Just like teaching critical race theory in schools is not just for the kids impacted by systemic racism, neither is teaching about queerness from books like In the Dream House. Teaching white kids that other people of other races, their peers, are going to have trouble in their lives when they move throughout these systems that them as white kids are not going to have, helps them to learn empathy, and it encourages them to change the way that they move throughout these systems, and then if they can be in a position where they can change the systems, do so that the next generation of BIPOC kids does not have it so damn hard. So similarly, teaching the straight kids that queer kids are not going to have the same privileges in these systems, and therefore they need to be there for their peers, is not teaching a victim complex. It's just teaching some fucking empathy to kids who have privileges within these systems. And it's telling the queer kids and or the BIPOC kids that we see the issues in the structures and we see the part that we play in that, and that we're doing what we can to dismantle it because their lives are worth protecting. So in conclusion, In the Dream House is a book that could save some lives. Systemic racism exists. We do need to teach kids about covert racism and internalized bias and how to be anti-racist, and depriving kids of that education is a violation of their human rights. End rant. Since this is a booktube channel, I did read excerpts from the book. That book is really important to me. The book is really fucking important to me. I made a list of some books that I'm going to recommend because this video references a lot of shit that I learned, mostly from women of color, to be honest. And I really want you to crack them open and read them yourselves, particularly if you are in dissenting opinion towards this video, which I don't know why you would be here, but all right. Outside of the obvious recommendation to read In the Dream House, which yes, has a couple of sexually explicit passages, and the problem with that is, oh, there isn't? Okay, then we can move on. Oh my god, some people have sex. Oh no, it's so scary. Oh, I don't like to talk about it. Oh god. Somebody think of the children. The other one what? I'm tired, it's midnight. The first one I'm going to recommend is Mediocre by Ijeoma Oluo. Ijeoma Oluo also wrote So You Want to Talk About Race. I assume that's good, but I have not read that one, so I guess if you want to read that, go for it. I'm sure it's delightful. She's fantastic. I highly recommend following her on Instagram. She is just a phenomenal person and does more teaching than she gets compensated for. Let's just put it that way. So Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America is so fantastic and a wealth of info. So this one, I referenced in this video at some point, the racist origins of the SATs and the NFL. This goes into depth about that. It also goes into depth about sort of the like internalized misogyny of white women, and also talks about like Bernie bros and the sexism there. Yikes, yikes. So there's just a wealth of info there, and I cannot recommend that book enough. I'm gonna reread it, I think, by the end of this year because it's so good. I have a video on it where it talks about how, like, where it talked about, like, why I'm tired of the phrase not all men, and that was a good jumping off point to use that book, but there's so much more to it, and I would like to go through everything I learned from it, but I'm gonna have to reread it. Anyway, okay, that was a whole thing. The next one I'm going to recommend is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. This talks, especially in the beginning, a lot about individualism and how harmful that is, and how we don't see each other as parts of a whole, how we're not working working towards like the collective good, and that has a lot to do with why people don't want to talk about critical race theory. So I'm not finished with it. I'm reading it right now on audio, and it's a delight. Angela Davis actually narrates it, so I can't recommend it highly enough if you want to learn more about it has to do with like how everyone is connected and how individualism is bullshit, and how what happens in Palestine relates to how things happened in Ferguson, Missouri. So that. Next one I'm going to talk about is White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad, and this is, oh my god, what a punch in the gut this was. This goes in depth about how white women weaponize their tears against women of color, but it also has a great section on white women weaponizing sexuality. I'm not saying that right. White women, basically how white women are the only people that are seen as rapeable, and women of color are seen as sexually more promiscuous, and how white men are not seen as rapists, and historically the background of that, and how white women would end up getting men of color in trouble for rapes that they did not do. And sexuality, there's a lot to it, but the historical parts of that, the whole sexuality and sexual assault piece of it was so important. That book was phenomenal. Also a good one to read on audio. It went really fast, and again, I would like to reread it. Actually, I want to get a physical copy of that so that I can annotate. Anyway, I'm rambling again. The next one I'm going to recommend is I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown. This is, oh man, I've talked about this multiple times on my channel. This book is so fucking good. Every single piece of this is so fucking good. One part that really stayed with me is where she talks about how even in stuff like health classes, they are made with like whiteness centered. So for instance, she was in a health class and she was like, well, this stuff does not pertain to me, because it's like saying you have to wash your hair every day in order to be cleanly, and that perpetuates the idea that black hair is dirty. And they had written these, health books with white centered beauty standards. So, but it also talks about her experiences being a woman of color in particularly in like Christian communities, which was, oh my gosh, what a wealth of information. And I loved that book. I loved it so much. The next one I'm going to talk about is Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. Did I tab the absolute shit out of this? I truly did. This is just, I don't even know where to begin. So I just want to point out a few chapters that I had not really had a lot of things that I had not thought of. So things like the fetishization of fierce, like the fierce black woman and how that perpetuates stereotypes. Black girls don't have eating disorders. The hood doesn't hate smart people. Reproductive justice, eugenics, and maternal mortality. And then parenting while marginalized. Those were chapters that really stood out to me and taught me just a wealth of info. Talks a lot about also like eugenics and disability, and also respectability politics in rape culture. I mean, truly, like, this is such a small book and it packs such a punch. I can't recommend this highly enough. And then the last one I'm going to recommend is not by a person of color. It's written by a white dude named Ben Sheehan, and it's OMG, what the fuck does the Constitution actually say? This is a very short audiobook. I believe it's 4 hours long. That literally just, and the Constitution is really short. It just reads you the parts of the Constitution, and then he goes through and explains it in depth with very, very easily consumed. It's very digestible, and it will help you understand systemic racism, because the Constitution obviously has a lot to do with law, and it explains a lot of the systems that are in place that are racist, that were set up with a framework of racism, like voting and the prison industrial complex and the military and gun laws, and of course slavery itself. There's so much more. There's so many books on this, and I'll never be able to get to them all, but if you have any recommendations, leave them down below. Anyway, I'm exhausted. It's like 12:30 at night. I'm glad to have gotten this off my chest. I feel better. This was cathartic. Was this fun? I can't believe I just filmed an entire fucking video because this stupid ass white lady in Texas shat on one of my favorite books. Oh, and y'all don't you dare message Jennifer JM Buckleweed, JM Buckler, about this fucking video. Don't bring her to my comment section. I don't want her here. This is not about her. This is really not about her. This is about a huge mass of white parents in the United States who have collectively decided that they're going to use their kids to virtue signal.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
So that they can't be held accountable or teach their kids any fucking empathy. So instead of making this about Jennifer, please direct your attention to sharing the work of people like Kimberly Crenshaw and Austin Channing Brown and Mickey Kendall all over the timeline. Also, Free Palestine. Go donate to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. I have a link down below. And buy Carmen's book and recommend it to people. Teach your kids about dildos. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a fucking dildo. People have sex, and here's something they used to have sex. What's the big deal? It's not a big deal. It's sex. Oh my god. Most people do it. Just get over it. And most importantly, just teach your kids shit that is true, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Stop being stupid. Alright, thanks for watching. Okay, that's all I have to say. I'm fucking tired. Alright, I'm fucking tired. I've talked. I need a drink. Where's my water? Fuck, this video went on so much longer than I had planned. Oh my god, I'm exhausted. My white peers are exhausting me. Cancel them all. Cancel culture doesn't exist, but we'll talk about that in a different video. I'm too tired tonight. I wish this was vodka. Alright, thanks for watching. Leave your comments down below. Unless you're a dick, then you can just go away. Make sure you go follow Ijeoma Oluo on Instagram and Mickey Kendall and Austin Channing Brown and Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw, before I go, Kimberly Crenshaw regularly posts on her Twitter feed different live videos that she'll be doing in conversation with other people. And actually, Angela Davis just did one about Palestine the other day with Palestinians and other advocates for justice. So start signing up to watch them. Like, this is a very, if you don't want to read a whole ass book, this is a very easy way for you to learn. Okay, that's really it. I'm gonna go. Bye.